Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma is a slasher horror film and the third feature from director Jane Schoenbrun, following their previous two films, I Saw the TV Glow from 2024 and We're All Going to the World's Fair in 2021. And this movie basically follows this meek kind of writer-director, played by Hannah Einbinder, who gets given the keys to the Camp Miasma franchise, and she goes to find the actress who played the final girl in the first movie, Billy Preston, played by Gillian, and the film basically follows the two of them and the relationship that blossoms between the two of them throughout the movie. Now, going into this movie, I really had no idea what to expect. I haven't actually seen either of Jane Schoenbrun's previous two films. I do want to. I do remember when those two films both came out. I've had multiple opportunities to see I Saw the TV Glow, but I've just never gotten around to seeing it. There's always been something that's gotten in the way. But I'm kind of glad that this was my first exposure to Jane Schoenbrun and their movies, because I feel like this was probably more likely to be my cup of tea. I don't know if I'm not going to like their previous two films, but from what I've heard, they're more kind of darker, more introspective and more depressing. I probably would still like them, but this, I feel like, was more likely to be my cup of tea, slightly more mainstream and commercial compared to their previous two films. More of a kind of fun genre movie, also quite weird and different, but a more kind of joyful film, less kind of dark and depressing. And yeah, what I really appreciated about this movie was that it was just a lot of fun and just very weird and different. And I love weird and different. I wasn't sure 100% going in if it was just going to be my cup of tea or not, because I'm not necessarily a big fan of like slasher horror movies. It's not really my kind of thing. But like I was saying, at the same time, I do like really weird, different movies. And so I'm not necessarily a big fan of big mainstream horror movies, but I do love weird indie kind of movies like this. I didn't totally love it. I didn't think it was absolutely perfect. I do have a couple of little issues and nitpicks with it, but for the most part, I had a really good time watching this movie. And like I was mentioning, my favourite thing about this movie was just how unashamedly, unabashedly just weird and different it was. It wasn't trying to be like anything else. I could very much get the sense of who Jane Schoenbrun is from this movie and what they're kind of going for, and how their films are kind of like reminiscent and evocative of the experiences they've gone through in real life, but just within the context of just a weird, crazy genre movie like this. And I personally just love it when filmmakers just take such bold swings and don't play it safe at all and just do something so completely and utterly radical and different. Because especially with a trans filmmaker like Schoenbrun, you'd think, oh, was someone like that actually in the industry making, I mean, it's not a massive budget movie, but it is a bigger budget movie than any other trans filmmaker is making right now. And the fact that they're kind of in the studio system making a slightly more commercial, more mainstream movie, you think, oh, will they be more likely to kind of play it safe and not do something too weird and different? But I personally love it when a filmmaker just does their own thing. You know, they're not afraid of what people will think. Especially the third act of this movie, I feel like was just such a big, bold swing, quite kind of Lynchian at times, quite David Lynch-esque with the third act, because it takes this kind of meta turn just past the halfway point, and when we get into that third act, it does become so meta and crazy and different. And I was like, yes, this is what I signed up for, because I wasn't totally loving the movie up until that point. I feel like it had a little bit of a dip in the middle, but when we got into that third act, I was like, yes, this is what I wanted. This is what I was kind of hoping to see from this kind of movie. But another thing I really liked and really appreciated about this movie was that although it was on one hand a very kind of like weird, psychedelic, psychological, metatextual trip of a movie, on one hand, it was also within the context of this really kind of fun, campy genre movie as well. So I could see it on that level appealing to a wider range of people than maybe their previous two films that were, from what I hear, smaller and more darker and more introspective. This, even though it is also very weird and different and exploring these characters on a kind of deeper psychological level, it was also very just fun and campy and entertaining at the same time. I'm not necessarily the biggest horror fan. I don't have a massive repertoire, and I'm not, that well versed in horror movies. Like I said, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of big mainstream commercial horror movies. I'm more of a fan of like weirder stuff like this. But towards the beginning, especially, kind of reminded me of like Prano Bailey Bond's Censor from 5 years ago. It had that kind of feel to it, the kind of weird lo-fi indie feel to it. But whereas Censor was kind of like a small British kind of indie horror movie about video nasties from the 80s, this was like kind of like that, but just more American, obviously, and gay, and about horror slasher movies. So it kind of reminded me of that. It was kind of evocative of that a little bit. And also, I've got to talk about the look of this film. I loved the look of it. Shot on 35mm film by cinematographer Eric Yu, and I love it when movies are shot on film. It just gives it just such a unique look and feel to it. It really feels like you're just watching something from like the classic Hollywood age, because obviously films aren't generally shot on film nowadays, and this film just has a lovely filmic quality to it. And I love it when you see like the little cigarette burns, and it just, you know, it just feels like you're watching a movie from like the 40s or something, and it just has a really lovely look to it, this movie. And also the use of matte paintings, the use of kind of glass matte paintings in this movie for certain backgrounds gives it that psychedelic, almost dreamlike quality to it that we were going for. And yeah, I also love it when filmmakers use matte paintings in movies, because obviously that is also a thing that was more kind of used most of the time in like the 40s with stuff like, you know, Citizen Kane and, you know, films like that, Black Narcissus. But I just love matte paintings when they're used in movies. I love the kind of unique, kind of stylized look and feel it gives to the movie. Really helps to kind of set it apart and make it just look totally different from other movies like this. Also, I've got to talk about the performances from Hannah Einbinder and Gillian Anderson. Obviously, this was the first kind of big film role for Hannah Einbinder. Maybe not her first appearance in a movie, I'm not sure, but definitely her first kind of leading role in a film. And I'm actually surprised it took this long, because she was actually really great. And obviously her time's been taken up with the Hacks TV show, I guess, over the last however many years. But she was so good in this movie, and she was just really great in the role of Chris, this kind of meek kind of writer-director who was a little like kind of awkward and nerdy and, you know, not very comfortable opening up with, you know, her sexuality and being kind of intimate with other people, and she's just so focused on her work and, you know, movies and that kind of stuff. Actually kind of surprisingly related to the character way more than I thought I was going to. I was like, oh, this is kind of like me. Just how she was kind of like a bit kind of uncomfortable with expressing her sexuality and just feeling like a bit awkward of being kind of intimate with other people and expressing her feelings, and feeling like she just got to, you know, keep her head down and focus on her work and focus on making movies, and not feeling totally comfortable and relaxed about the idea of like love and romance and sex and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think she did a great job in this movie. And Gillian Anderson too, is kind of like a two-hander between them. I don't think Gillian Anderson had as much to do in this movie as I was hoping, but she still was really great in the role of Billy Preston, the final girl from the original Camp Miasma movie, grown up, and just the connection between the two of them, because that's what's really at the heart of this movie, and how it's just exploring certain things like, you know, fear and desire and love and death and all that kind of stuff. And I actually really like that. I really like when a movie is just all about kind of exploring the themes, and it's more about getting you to kind of feel stuff. And there's something that really surprised me about this movie was that it was actually kind of had this kind of really kind of tender, heartfelt, kind of emotional core to it. On one hand, it was this kind of weird, crazy, psychedelic, metatextual kind of trip of a movie told within the context of this kind of crazy kind of horror slasher movie. But it was also kind of had a surprising amount of heart and emotion to it as well. It was very much about these characters and their feelings and what they're going through and the connection between the two of them and them bonding with each other. And just, yeah, I really liked the kind of the heartfelt, emotional core to this movie. That was something that really surprised me and caught me off guard, that I really wasn't expecting. That I actually kind of felt quite a lot. It wasn't just a weird, crazy, nutty kind of movie. It also had a real kind of heart to it as well. Yeah, and if I was getting into negatives, I didn't absolutely love this movie. I did have a couple of little issues and nitpicks with it. The film was quite simple and straightforward plot-wise. Not a whole lot happens in the movie. It's pretty much just in one location with these two characters. It's not really got this kind of grand, complex narrative. So if you go into this movie expecting a really kind of great, long, winding, intricate kind of narrative, you're going to be let down, because this movie really is more just focusing on the two of those people played by Gillian and Hannah Einbinder, and just the connection that they have and that they develop throughout the movie. I feel like there was kind of like a little bit of a lull in the middle. I was kind of really into it in like the first act, and then it kind of really won me back over again with the kind of really bonkers third act that took that just massive big swing. But I feel like in the middle it had a little bit of a dip. I know the second act was the strongest. But then just as it was starting to lose me, it really kind of won me back over and really got me hooked and engaged again with that really kind of crazy third act where it just goes all out. So yeah, I feel like it took a little bit of a dip in the middle. There was a little bit of a lull there. But then it won me back over with our third act. And there we go, that wraps up my review of Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma. A very kind of difficult movie to talk about, especially without getting into spoilers. There's a lot of things that I did really like and really appreciate about this movie, but I don't really want to get into specifics, so I don't want to kind of spoil certain things. Like, for example, there's a kind of character, Little Death, played by a trans actor, and I really like kind of what they did with that character. How it was really kind of flipping the kind of, you know, stereotypical kind of trans villain trope from past movies on its head. But I don't really want to get too much into that kind of thing because I don't want to spoil kind of certain specific details about the movie. But yeah, on a whole, I actually really enjoyed this movie. It's not going to be for everyone. This isn't going to be everybody's cup of tea. It's certainly not a kind of commercial mainstream horror movie by any means. But if you're a fan of kind of like weird indie kind of horror movies, as I am, then I think you'll really enjoy this movie. It definitely has something to say. So even if you don't come out of it absolutely loving it, like me, you're definitely going to appreciate the movie for it being something just totally different that also has something to say. And it gets you thinking about it afterwards as well. Very weird, very meta, but also an emotional core to it as well. So yeah, there we go. That wraps up my review of Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma. Have you seen the movie yet? And if so, what do you think about it? I'd love to know in the comments down below. And if you missed my last review and you want to watch that, be sure to go ahead and click over here, or perhaps down here to catch up on all of my recent videos. And as always, if you like this and haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to see more. But until then, I'll see you next time.